Can a single battle change the course of world history? Imagine a force that cannot be stopped, an army as swift as a storm, bringing destruction to entire nations. The Mongol Empire stretched from the shores of the Pacific Ocean to the heart of Europe, turning cities to ashes and states into shadows of the past. It seemed that nothing could stand in the way of this force of nature. But in 1260, their advance met with unexpected resistance. Egypt, the last stronghold of the Islamic world, faced imminent defeat. Mongol troops had already captured Syria, and their scouts had crossed the borders of Palestine. The world held its breath, waiting for the end. After all, no one could stand against an army that had conquered everything. Almost no one. They were met by an army that should not have existed, the Mamluks, former slaves who had become the elite of military art. They did not have numerical superiority, but they had something the Mongols did not know about: fanatical discipline, knowledge of the terrain, and a steely determination to die rather than retreat. Watch the video to the end to find out how, on the plains of Ain Jalut, former slaves stopped an army that had conquered half the world, why that day marked the beginning of the end of Mongol power, and how one battle changed the history of civilization. I will reveal a secret that completely changes the perception of history.
Attention!
The Mongols won not only because of their strength, but also because of a unique system that made their army one of the most effective in history. It was not just a military horde, but a perfectly tuned machine for conquering the world, based on iron discipline, phenomenal mobility, and ingenious strategy. The Mongols were the first to truly wage a world war, using the resources of one conquered country to conquer the next. This allowed them to rapidly expand their power, capturing new territories with every step. The foundations of this amazing machine were laid by Genghis Khan himself, but his grandsons managed to perfect it. In particular, Genghis Khan's grandson, Hulagu, led his army to the Middle East with a clear goal: to subjugate all the lands up to the Mediterranean Sea. His campaign was not just another conquest, it was a systematic change in the political map of the world. The Mongols not only conquered, but also actively borrowed the best technologies and military techniques of the conquered peoples. They became masters of siege warfare, something their ancestors, accustomed to life in the steppes, could not boast of before. In addition, the Mongols used completely unique psychological tactics that significantly strengthened their strategic advantage. Before the army approached the cities, they were given an ultimatum: either they surrender or they will be wiped off the face of the earth. Those cities that did not agree were subjected to merciless reprisals. The reputation of the Mongols as cruel and merciless conquerors preceded their army, creating an atmosphere of fear and panic among the cities that followed. Their rivals, already knowing what awaited them, often preferred to surrender their cities without a fight to avoid destruction. In addition, the Mongol army was organized according to a decimal system, which ensured incredible control and discipline even in the largest battles. The warriors were divided into tens, hundreds, thousands, and tumen, huge units of 10,000 men. This simple structure made the army extremely flexible, and orders were transmitted lightning fast using signal flags and drums, allowing such gigantic masses of troops to be manipulated as a single organism. A unique system of yams was used to communicate between the parts of their vast empire. It was a network of couriers who jumped from station to station, delivering messages over enormous distances. Each station was equipped with horsemen and supplies for rest, which allowed the Mongol army to cover hundreds of kilometers a day. This made it the most informed army in the world, giving it a huge advantage on the battlefield, as timely information played a decisive role. In 1258, this well-oiled system led Hulagu's army to Baghdad, the capital of the Abbasid Caliphate. Baghdad had been the cultural and scientific center of the entire Islamic world for several centuries, and its fall was a tragedy for the entire region. After a short siege, the city was taken, and the consequences were catastrophic. Great libraries, scientific academies, and all the wealth of knowledge and culture were destroyed. The caliphate ceased to exist, and with it disappeared its influence over vast territories of the Middle East. After Baghdad fell, Hulagu's army headed for Syria. Cities such as Aleppo and Damascus opened their gates, hoping for mercy from the Mongols. They understood that resistance would be futile. Mongol patrols reached the shores of the Mediterranean Sea and approached the borders of Egypt. It seemed that the entire known world was about to become part of the Mongol Empire, and resistance was doomed to failure. However, Egypt stood in the way of the Mongols, and it was here that Hulagu's army faced its decisive test. The striking power of the Mongols lay in their mounted archers, who combined the speed of light cavalry with the deadly force of long-range attacks. The Mongols could circle around the enemy army for hours, showering it with arrows, avoiding direct confrontation and disrupting the enemy. This caused the enemy to lose morale and strength, and then the Mongols, with their enormous advantage in mobility, easily destroyed the weakened troops. When the Mongols reached Egypt, they seemed invincible. There had not been a single major battle in the last 50 years that the Mongols had lost. Their tactics were flawless, their warriors were hardened in fierce battles, and their commanders were experienced strategists. It seemed that the question was not whether the Mongols would conquer Egypt, but how quickly it would happen. All of North Africa lay at their feet, and on the horizon loomed a new phase in human history, where the Mongols could become the world's dominant power. The question we must ask ourselves today is, was there anyone in the world who could stop such power in open battle? The Mongol army seemed invincible, and no one could offer a worthy opponent capable of holding back its advance. Who could challenge this giant when it had such strength, such strategy, and such organization in its ranks? We are very interested in hearing your point of view. Write about it in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss our next investigations of great battles and historical turning points. Are you ready to learn the truth about those who dared to challenge the Mongols? Egypt was not ruled by ordinary rulers. The dynasty that took power was unique. It was not just a dynasty, but a military caste, the Mamluks. The word Mamluk itself means belonging, or slave in Arabic. Most of these people were bought at slave markets at a young age and brought to Cairo, where they were trained for a cruel and singular purpose, to become perfect warriors. Herein lies an amazing paradox. These slaves became the highest elite of Egypt. The Mamluks had no family ties with the local Egyptians. Instead, their only family was their military corps, their regiment, and their master. From an early age, they were taught only one thing: war. Their lives were devoted solely to this, and their fate was sealed in childhood when they, children from different corners of the world, ended up in Egypt, where they became part of this military society. The Mamluks, like their future enemies, the Mongols, were mainly from the Kitbuqa steppes, which were located north of the Black Sea. This was the same region where the Mongols came from, and so the Mamluks were natural horsemen and archers. This meant that they grew up in the same military culture as their enemies, which gave them a unique advantage in future conflicts. The Mamluks understood their opponents' maneuvers and could fight as effectively as the Mongols. The Mamluks' training system was extremely brutal but effective. It was called Furusiya, and was not just riding and archery lessons. It was a complex martial art that included saber and spear skills, tactics for fighting in formation, and individual skills. They were versatile soldiers, capable of fighting both at long range and in close combat. The Mamluks were trained to be flexible and unpredictable in battle, and their skill on the battlefield made them incredibly dangerous. Unlike European feudal armies, which were formed from temporary militias, the Mamluks were a professional, permanent army. War was their craft, their sole purpose in life. They lived in barracks, trained day after day, and went into battle as a single unit, bound by ties of brotherhood and loyalty. There was no room for weakness in their army, for every defeat could mean death. By 1260, The Mamluks had not only seized power in Egypt, but also founded their own sultanate. These former slaves became the ruling elite, not mere servants, but masters. However, despite their strength, their state was torn apart by internal contradictions. Various factions of emirs, each seeking greater influence, were constantly fighting for power. In this political chaos, the question arose as to who could keep the country afloat at the most critical moments. And so, at this decisive moment, Sultan Qutuz came to the head of the Sultanate. Qutuz was also a former Mamluk who, showing all his determination and skill, managed to rise to the top of power. He was an experienced warrior and a skilled politician, but his position on the throne remained shaky. Many emirs did not trust him, believing that his power was too unstable. And it was at this moment that Qutuz faced a real threat. The greatest threat to his rule was another outstanding military leader, Baibars. Baibars was a charismatic, ruthless, and incredibly talented commander who fought against Qutuz while in exile in Syria. The two did not trust each other, but they realized that without joining forces, they would not be able to win. Since Qutuz understood that in order to effectively counter the Mongol threat, he needed to unite the scattered forces, he took a risky step. He invited Baibars to return to Egypt. Despite their enmity, Baibars agreed. He brought his loyal warriors with him, and the two leaders, who could have been great allies, met in Cairo, but their relationship remained complicated. The entire Mamluk army was a tangle of contradictions, where each regiment was bound not so much by loyalty to Egypt as to its master or commander. These forces were united only by a common fear of the approaching storm in the form of the Mongol threat. Egypt was the last frontier in the Mongols' path. Their army was the only force in the region capable of matching the Mongols in terms of cavalry quality and combat skills. But was this army of former slaves, torn apart by internal strife, ready to face the conquerors of the world? In the next chapter, we will see what ultimatum the Mongols sent to Cairo and how Sultan Qutuz's response changed history forever. What happened next changed all the rules of the game. It was perhaps the most daring and fateful diplomatic move of the 13th century. It began with an event that took place thousands of kilometers from Egypt. In 1259, the great Khan Mungke, ruler of the entire Mongol Empire, died. Hulagu, the conqueror of Baghdad, was forced to interrupt his campaign. As one of Genghis Khan's descendants, he had to return to Mongolia to participate in the election of a new great Khan. It was a decisive moment. Hulagu took most of his army with him, leaving only an expeditionary force in Syria. He put his best commander, Kitbuqa, in charge of this corps. Kitbuqa was not Mongolian by birth. He came from the Naiman, a Turkic tribe. He was an incredibly experienced and utterly loyal military leader who had never been defeated. Kitbuqa sent envoys from Syria to Cairo with a traditional Mongol ultimatum. The message was written in derogatory terms. It demanded that Sultan Qutuz surrender immediately and unconditionally. The Mongols demanded that Qutuz personally come to Kitbuqa, hand over his treasury, and recognize the authority of the great Khan. Panic reigned in Cairo. Many emirs, having heard about the fate of Baghdad, were inclined to accept the terms. They considered resistance pointless and suicidal. The entire history of the last decades had shown that it was useless to fight the Mongols. However, Sultan Qutuz convened a military council. At this council, Baibars had the decisive say. He made an impassioned speech, calling on the emirs to go to war. He argued that the Mongols knew no mercy and that surrender would not guarantee them their lives. Baibars insisted that it was better to die in battle than to be humiliated. Qutuz supported Baibars. He understood that any hint of weakness would lead to his own emirs overthrowing him. He had to show absolute determination. The Sultan made a decision that shocked even his own advisors. He ordered the Mongol envoys to be detained. In medieval diplomacy, the person of an envoy was inviolable. This act was not just an insult, it was an unheard-of violation of all the rules. There was no turning back. It was tantamount to a declaration of total war. This harsh and uncompromising response had the desired effect on the Mamluk army. Doubts and fears gave way to the realization that battle was inevitable. All bridges had been burned. The emirs, seeing Qutuz's determination, rallied around him. Qutuz immediately gave the order for general mobilization. He gathered all available troops and emptied the treasury to pay salaries and prepare equipment. He understood that this would not be just a battle, but a battle for the very existence of Egypt. The Mamluk army began to prepare for the campaign. If you appreciate such bold and pivotal historical decisions, please like this video. Guess what happened next? To meet the Mongols, the Mamluks had to pass through the lands of their worst enemies. Qutuz's army marched out of Cairo and headed north towards Palestine, where a dangerous and difficult road awaited them. On this journey, they had to face the remnants of the Crusader states, which still controlled the Mediterranean coast. A key point on their route was Acre, the last stronghold of the Kingdom of Jerusalem, a powerful port still ruled by the orders of knights. The Mamluks and the Crusaders were in a state of constant war, and several years earlier they had fought fierce battles against each other. Now, however, Qutuz found himself in an extremely difficult position. His armies needed to pass through Acre, but attacking the city would be too risky. It would take time and resources that were needed to fight the Mongols. Therefore, Qutuz made a decision that might seem unexpected. He decided to try to negotiate with the Crusaders and sent his diplomats to Acre. The Crusaders, in turn, faced an equally difficult choice. On the one hand, the Mamluks were their traditional enemies, and helping them would be a betrayal of their ideals. On the other hand, however, the Mongols posed a much more frightening and existential threat. They had already ravaged the Christian principalities in Syria, and the Crusaders understood that if they did not stop the Mongols, they would be next in line. The Mongol commander Kitbuqa, although he came from a Christian tribe, showed no sympathy for the Latins. The Crusaders realized that after Egypt, the Mongols would come for them, which put them in an extremely uncomfortable position, both in terms of moral principles and survival. Intense negotiations began in Acre. The Knights Hospitaller and the Teutonic Knights were inclined to form an alliance with the Mamluks. They believed that the Mongol threat was the #1 problem and had to be stopped at all costs. However, the Templars and other barons were categorically opposed to such an alliance, considering it impossible due to their previous enmity with the Muslims. As a result, a compromise was reached, which proved to be a true display of Qutuz's political skill. The Crusaders declared their neutrality. They did not become allies of the Mamluks, but gave them permission to pass through their lands. Moreover, they opened their markets to the Mamluks. This was a strategically important step, as Qutuz's army was able to replenish its supplies of food and fodder, which was critical for continuing the campaign. This diplomatic success gave Qutuz a secure rear and the opportunity to focus on the main task, destroying the Mongol army. This neutrality, although unusual, became one of the key factors that allowed the Mamluks to move forward. The Mamluk army passed the walls of Acre without encountering any resistance. The soldiers of the two opposing armies silently watched each other. At that moment, everyone understood that their common fate was being decided. This strange neutrality became an opportunity for Qutuz and his army, and also demonstrated how the cruel reality of war can change old enmities and lead to unexpected alliances for the sake of survival. Having secured his flanks and supply lines, Qutuz could now focus on his main task, finding and destroying Kitbuqa's army. And as we will learn in the next chapter, he already knew where the decisive battle would take place. But here's the question: could the Crusaders have acted differently in this situation? Could they have chosen a different path that would have affected the outcome of the struggle with the Mongols? In the next chapter, we will learn what ideal location Qutuz chose for the battle and how this decision changed the course of history forever. The Mamluk army left the coastal strip and advanced deeper into Palestine. Qutuz did not lead his army at random. He deliberately moved along a route that forced Kitbuqa to respond. Upon learning of the Egyptian campaign, the Mongol commander gathered his forces and marched out to meet them. Kitbuqa was absolutely confident of victory. He commanded a battle-hardened corps that included not only Mongol Tumans, but also contingents from allied Armenian and Georgian princes. Throughout his career, he had never suffered a single defeat and had no doubt that the Mamluks were just another obstacle. Qutuz, in turn, understood that he could not allow the Mongols to dictate the terms. It was vitally important for him to choose the battlefield himself. He was looking for a location that would allow him to neutralize the strengths of the Mongols and use his own advantages. He found such a place in the Jezreel Valley. It was a wide plain surrounded by hills. The place was known as Ain Jalut, which translates from Arabic as Goliath's Spring. According to legend, it was here that the biblical David defeated Goliath. This location was not chosen by chance. It was ideal for Qutuz's tactical plan. The wide valley provided enough space for the cavalry to maneuver, something at which both the Mongols and the Mamluks were masters. But the surrounding hills were to play a key role. The hills were covered with forest and shrubs, making them an ideal place for an ambush. A large contingent of troops could be hidden there unnoticed. Qutuz planned to use this feature of the landscape. In addition, the valley contained a vital resource, the very Goliath Spring. In the hot climate of Palestine, control of a source of fresh water was crucial. Qutuz knew that Kitbuqa's army, after its march, would inevitably seek water. The Mamluks arrived first. Qutuz immediately set about implementing his plan. He did not line up his army on the plain to await the enemy. Instead, he ordered the main, most powerful and numerous part of his army to hide in the forests on the slopes of the hills. In plain sight, in the valley itself, he left only the vanguard. This detachment was to play the most dangerous role in the coming spectacle. They were to become bait for the Mongol commander. Qutuz set his trap. He used his knowledge of the terrain to create a situation in which the Mongols' numerical superiority and tactics would turn against them. The entire strategy was based on deception and perfect timing. Want to know a secret that will change your perception of the Mamluks? They weren't going to just stand and die. They decided to defeat the Mongols with their own most cunning weapon, the tactic of feigned retreat. The Mongols had perfected this technique, and it had brought them many victories. The Mamluks, coming from the same steps, knew this tactic well. They understood how it worked and what psychological effect it had on the enemy. Qutuz's plan was to turn this strategy on its head and use it against its creators. The plan was bold and incredibly risky. It required iron discipline and flawless execution. The slightest mistake or sign of panic could lead to the complete destruction of the entire army. As we already know, Qutuz divided his army into two parts. The main force, the elite, heavily armed Mamluk Guard, was hidden in ambush in the hills. They were to wait for the signal and not reveal themselves under any circumstances. The visible part of the army, the decoy, was the vanguard under the command of Baybars. This was not a random choice. Baybars was the most aggressive and charismatic commander, and his soldiers were ready to follow him through fire and water. Baybar's task was extremely difficult. He had to attack the Mongols, engage them in fierce combat, and then, in the heat of battle, feign panic. His detachment had to falter, turn around, and run, drawing the Mongols with them. This was the most dangerous moment. A feigned retreat could very easily turn into a real one. The warriors had to run convincingly enough for the enemy to believe them, but at the same time, maintain order and control so that they could re-engage in battle at the right moment. The purpose of this maneuver was to draw Kitbuqa's entire army deep into the valley. The Mongols, confident of victory and eager to finish off the fleeing enemy, would have to stretch out their ranks and, most importantly, pass the hills where the ambush awaited them. Sultan Qutuz himself took up position with his reserves on one of the hills, from where he had a view of the entire battlefield. He was to personally observe the course of the battle and give the order for the main attack at the very moment when the trap was ready to snap shut. The whole plan was a giant gamble. Qutuz was betting everything: his army, his throne, and the fate of Egypt. He was betting that Kitbuqa's arrogance and Baybar's discipline would work perfectly. Which do you think is more difficult? To attack or to perfectly simulate a panicked retreat? In the next chapter, we will see how the battle began. At dawn on September 3rd, 1260, the Mongol army entered the Ain Jalut valley. Kitbuqa's scouts reported that they had spotted the Egyptian army, and the Mongol commander himself soon saw Baybar's vanguard standing in battle formation before him. Kitbuqa quickly assessed the enemy's numbers, and without hesitation, concluded that this was the entire Mamluk army. He was confident that the enemy, without attempting to flee, had decided to engage in battle on the open plain, which only played into his hands. Kitbuqa was delighted. The enemy clearly underestimated his forces, not understanding who they were dealing with. This was exactly what he had been waiting for, a battle in open terrain, where he could unleash the full power of his seasoned army. Confident in his abilities, he did not hesitate. He did not conduct additional reconnaissance or waste time with wait-and-see tactics. He gave the order for an immediate and full-scale attack. The entire Mongol army, including allied contingents, moved forward. It was an avalanche of horsemen rushing through the valley, with the aim of overturning and destroying the Mamluk formation in one blow. Baybars accepted the challenge. He did not flinch, but responded harshly. His mounted archers rushed towards the Mongols, showering them with arrows with great accuracy. A maneuverable battle ensued in the valley, in which both sides demonstrated their skills. The horsemen spun their horses, shot, retreated, and attacked again. The movement was rapid, and the air was filled with the whistling of arrows. The Mamluks and Mongols were worthy opponents, and their tactics and weapons were very similar. For a long time, neither side could gain a decisive advantage. The battle was fierce, and both armies demonstrated the highest level of skill. Kitbuqa watched the battle and saw his warriors begin to press the enemy. He sent more and more reserves into battle, seeking to intensify the onslaught and break the Mamluks' resistance. His goal was clear: a quick and decisive victory. But Baybars performed his role brilliantly. He fought in the front lines, inspiring his warriors, and they held out just long enough for the Mongols to become fully engaged in the battle and lose their initial organization. Then came the turning point. As planned, Baybars' troops began to retreat. First in one place, then in another. This retreat became increasingly chaotic, and at some point it took the form of a full-fledged flight. This was the key moment, and Kitbuqa, seeing the enemy begin to panic, realized that they would be victorious. The Mamluks began to retreat, and their vanguard ran. Turning around, they rushed deep into the valley, to the very spring that had been designated in advance as the place to lure the enemy into a trap. For Kitbuqa, this was a familiar and long-awaited signal. His eyes finally reflected confidence. The enemy was broken. He thought he had just achieved his goal, and everything was going according to plan. But he did not know that this was only the beginning of the most terrible turn of events. Kitbuqa watched as panic spread among the Mamluks, and immediately gave the order he had been waiting for so long. He ordered his army to pursue and finish off the retreating enemies. The Mongol horsemen, anticipating victory, rushed furiously after the fleeing Mamluks, not noticing that a trap was hidden in their path. In the heat of the chase, the Mongol army lost all combat order. The warriors spread out across the valley, striving to be the first to catch up with Baybars and his detachment. They raced past wooded hills and rough terrain, unaware of the impending danger. Baybars, knowing the terrain and calculating the distance perfectly, led the Mongols exactly where he wanted to meet them, in the narrow part of the valley, where their flanks were vulnerable. Sultan Qutuz, watching the maneuver from his command post, realized that the moment had come. He gave the order, and at the signal of battle trumpets and drums, the main Mamluk army descended on the Mongols from 3 sides. It was a sudden and shocking attack. Thousands of fresh, heavily armed Mamluk horsemen attacked the stretched and disorganized flanks of the Mongol army with incredible force and precision. At the same time, Bibar's fleeing detachment turned around and struck the Mongols head-on. The Mongol army, which had just been pursuing the enemy, found itself trapped in an instant. They were caught in a ring of fire as new Mamluk forces attacked from the flanks and left rear, while Bibar's detachment delivered the main blow from the front. The Mongols were surrounded, and their entire army went from being the pursuer to the prey. The Mongols tried to break through the encirclement, but their forces were weakened by the long chase and fatigue. A battle began that would become one of the most spectacular and brutal in history. Realizing they were trapped, the Mongols fought desperately, like doomed men. They tried to counterattack in all directions, using their best forces to break through the encirclement. However, they were already too disorganized, and their opponents, fresh and determined, did not allow them to escape. The valley of Ain Jalut became the site of one of the fiercest battles of the 13th century. The Mamluks, thanks to their heavy armor and excellent training, won in close combat, while the Mongols, with their lighter armor and speed, but without the same physical protection, found themselves at a disadvantage. Every blow from a Mamluk was deadly, and their armor gave them a decisive advantage in hand-to-hand combat. Kitbuqa, realizing that his army was trapped, tried to organize resistance. He gathered his best warriors and personal guard around him, preparing for a final decisive defense. Kitbuqa had no intention of surrendering, and despite the obvious danger, he continued to fight to the last, trying to break through the encirclement. At this time, the entire Mongol army, even those who were unable to fight, realized that their battle was nearing a catastrophic end. The Mamluks, united and disciplined, used this moment to completely destroy the threat. No matter how desperately the Mongols fought, it was impossible to oppose the professional, well-trained Mamluk army. This battle in the Ain Jalut Valley became a historic milestone, not only as one of the fiercest clashes, but also as a moment that changed the course of history. The Mongols, who seemed invincible, faced what Qutuz himself called his main goal, to stop the unbridled advance of the Mongol Empire into the Middle East. The Battle of Ain Jalut reached its climax at the most decisive moment. Despite the Mamluks' clear tactical advantage, the Mongol warriors showed incredible tenacity and fighting spirit. They fought without thinking of defeat, and their discipline was so high that at one point they almost turned the tide of battle in their favor. At one of the most intense moments of the battle, the Mongols launched a fierce attack, and the left flank of Qutuz's army began to give way. The soldiers began to retreat, and the situation seemed critical. If the Mongols had managed to break through the encirclement, victory could have slipped from the Mamluks' grasp. It was at this moment that Sultan Qutuz demonstrated his personal courage and leadership. Seeing that his flank was weakened and required immediate intervention, he removed his helmet so that the soldiers could see his face. This was not just a symbolic gesture, but a decisive step that boosted the army's morale. The Sultan personally led the reserve unit and led it into a counterattack, rushing into the thick of the battle to regain control of the situation. His presence on the battlefield was a powerful stimulus for the soldiers. Inspired by the example of their leader, the Mamluk warriors returned to the battle with redoubled strength, and the Mongols began to retreat. The critical moment had been overcome. The breakthrough had been eliminated, and the encirclement closed around the Mongol troops once again. Everything that seemed lost was restored. Victory became increasingly obvious for the Mamluks. At this time, Kitbuqa, commander of the Mongol forces, realized that the battle was lost. His army was disorganized, the losses were enormous, and the chances of victory were dwindling with every passing moment. His subordinates suggested that he retreat and save what remained of the army. But Kitbuqa rejected the idea. It was shameful for him to flee the battlefield, and he preferred to fight to the end, despite the obvious defeat. Gathering the remaining forces of the guard around him, Kitbuqa launched a final, desperate attack. It was more than just an attempt to win. He sought death in battle, ready to lay down his life for honor and his military reputation. But instead of death, he met a fate far more bitter for a proud commander. He was surrounded and captured. During the fierce battle, Kitbuqa was knocked from his horse and taken prisoner. When Kitbuqa was brought before Sultan Qutuz, he continued to behave defiantly and provocatively, despite his helplessness. He promised that Hulagu would return and take revenge for this defeat. However, Sultan Qutuz, realizing how dangerous the surviving commander was, showed no mercy. Qutuz knew that Kitbuqa could become a symbol of the future revival of the Mongol army, and that his life must not be spared if the Egyptian army wanted to achieve final victory. Kitbuqa's fate was decided right on the battlefield. His execution was not only the final point of this battle, but also a symbol of the complete triumph of the Mamluks. It was not just the destruction of one of the commanders, it was the destruction of his entire army, the morale of the Mongols. Deprived of their leader and symbol of their power, the Mongol troops finally lost all will to resist. After Kitbuqa was killed, the battle turned into a pursuit. The Mamluks began to chase scattered groups of Mongol warriors, destroying them one by one. By evening, when the sun was setting, the army that had seemed invincible that morning had ceased to exist. The Mongols, who had waged victorious campaigns for so many years, were now scattered and destroyed. Qutuz, in turn, won a complete and unconditional victory. The victory at Ain Jalut was not only a military triumph for the Mamluks, but also a historic moment for the entire Islamic world. This battle not only saved Egypt from the Mongol threat, but also demonstrated that the Mongols could be defeated, that their advance could be stopped. The battle became a symbol of courage, determination, and leadership, and Qutuz's victory ensured security and a future for the entire region. News of the victory at Ain Jalut spread throughout the Middle East with astonishing speed. The effect of this victory was so great that it shattered the myth of Mongol invincibility, which had long paralyzed the will of entire peoples. This myth, created by centuries of relentless conquests and lightning victories, was dispelled in a single day when the Mongol army suffered its first crushing defeat in open battle. The Battle of Ain Jalut was the first major defeat of the Mongol Empire in more than half a century of its existence. It is important to note that this defeat was not immediately avenged. Following this clash, the Mongols were unable to immediately assemble a new army to return to Egypt and continue their conquests. Internal strife and discord within the empire distracted Hulagu, and instead of continuing the offensive, he became involved in other problems in the east, which gave his enemies time to strengthen their positions. The border of the Mongol conquests in the Middle East was finally stopped at the Euphrates River. This meant that Egypt, which seemed to be on the verge of destruction, was saved. Along with Egypt, all of North Africa was saved. The Mongols, who had come so close to Palestine and Syria, were now forced to retreat. Their advance, which had been so formidable, was now on the wane. After Ain Jalut, the Mamluks, whose troops had defeated the Mongols, instantly regained control of all of Syria. As a result, the Mongol garrisons in Damascus and Aleppo were expelled. The Mamluk Sultanate in Cairo became the dominant force in the Islamic world, and its rulers became not only the heirs to the caliphate, but also the defenders of the faith from further conquests. This was a great moment in the history of the Islamic world, as it was then that the Mamluks proved their strength and right to leadership in the region. For Sultan Qutuz, who led the Egyptian forces at the Battle of Ain Jalut, it was a moment of triumph. He returned to Cairo as a hero, the savior of Egypt, who had united the scattered forces of the emirs, defeated the greatest threat, and proven his right to the throne. His authority in the country was unquestionable, and many expected his reign to bring long-awaited peace and stability to Egypt and the Islamic world as a whole. However, as often happens in history, events took an unexpected turn. During Qutuz's triumphant return to Cairo, he was killed while hunting. The conspiracy, which had been brewing for a long time among his entourage, was led by his chief commander, Baybars. This turn of events proved fatal, as Baybars, who had fought alongside Qutuz against the Mongols, seized the throne immediately after the Sultan's assassination and proclaimed himself the new Sultan of Egypt. It was Baybars, not Qutuz, who reaped the rewards of the great victory. He became one of the greatest sultans in the history of Egypt, continuing to fight both the Mongols and the Crusaders, strengthening and expanding the influence of the Mamluk Sultanate. His reign became a golden age for Egypt and the entire Islamic world. Baybars demonstrated not only his military talents, but also his political cunning, ensuring the prosperity of the Sultanate and leaving a significant legacy in the history of the region. The Battle of Ain Jalut forever changed the balance of power in the region. It showed the whole world that the Mongols could be defeated, that their invincibility was only a myth, not reality. The Mamluks' victory in this battle not only saved Egypt, but also preserved it as the center of Islamic civilization. In turn, this marked the beginning of the golden age of the Mamluk Sultanate, which remained a dominant force for many years.
The Mongol tide is broken.
The victory at Ain Jalut was achieved thanks to a combination of several factors. First, a sudden change of power in the Mongol Empire, which distracted Hulagu from new conquests. Second, the bold and decisive diplomacy of Qutuz, who managed to unite disparate forces for a common cause. Third, the neutrality of the Crusaders, who did not intervene in the events at that moment, giving the Mamluks a chance to win. But perhaps the most important factor was that the Mamluks themselves could not be called ordinary warriors. They were the only ones who knew the tactics of the Mongols from the inside, being themselves descendants of the steppe nomads. The Mamluks were people who could oppose the Mongol cavalry with an army equal in strength and skill. In the valley of Ain Jalut, two branches of one great steppe military tradition came together, and on that day, the Mamluks proved to be stronger. Thus, the victory at Ain Jalut not only became a key moment in the history of the Islamic world, but also demonstrated to the whole world that the power and strategy of the Mongols, although seemingly unbreakable, could still be defeated. This event also played a decisive role in the fate of Egypt and the entire region, determining the future of the Middle East for many years to come. We can see that the Battle of Ain Jalut was not just a battle, but a real turning point in world history. It stopped the seemingly unstoppable expansion of the Mongol Empire and saved an entire continent from conquest. It was a triumph of strategy, discipline, and a deep understanding of the enemy's tactics. The Mamluks, former slaves who became sultans, proved that even the most powerful military machine has its vulnerabilities. They used the enemy's arrogance and knowledge of the terrain to lure them into the perfect trap. This victory determined the fate of the Middle East for centuries. What other great battles or tactical moves do you think changed the course of history? Suggest topics for future videos you would like to see on our channel in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss new episodes.